Can you think, though, of something a little more recent? Because I think one of the aspects of the revolution was the colonists were saying they weren't part of the governing system. They weren't represented. So how about an example where people have no question have a say in the governance, but what they're doing is still maybe obstructionism?
Well, if you look to the Civil War, I mean, you can say that when we talk about distorting into treason, you can make the argument that that distorts into treason. However, I would say that the Southern states were completely justified in seceding because, I mean, if you look at Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration, he says that whenever a government tramples on the right of the people, it's their right to overthrow that government. And I think that at the same time, if you look at the time of the ratification, 3 of the 13 original colonies, Virginia, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island, only ratified the Constitution on the stipulation that they had the right to secede from the Union, and they were allowed to join the Union on that stipulation. So I think that although people argue that in seceding that they were treasonous, I think that they were justified in that opposition.
I would completely disagree with my colleague and say that the Southern states were not justified in separating themselves from the Union, because I feel that the founders created a perpetual Union, as there is no mechanism in the Constitution for states to leave the Union once they enter it. And for instance, the South had not exhausted all means before entering the war. They were winning battles. The Dred Scott decision, for example, was a huge victory for the South, and they were winning seats in Congress. So they had not exhausted all means. So I would say that is definitely disloyal opposition.
I would disagree with my colleague Curtis. The Constitution has no mechanism for states leaving the Union, and so by the 10th Amendment, the states reserve that right to choose to secede if they wish.
Okay.
Let's step back a moment and let me hear your thoughts on the relationship that may exist among the concepts of limited government, checks and balances, and loyal opposition.
Well, the people are often credited as the fourth branch of government, and so it is the people's role through loyal opposition to check the other powers of the government when they feel that it is impeded upon their own rights, such as if they feel that a certain piece of legislation is unlawful and is unconstitutional, they will act against it. Which is exactly how the Tea Partiers now feel like the federal government has gone against what the Constitution has said, and the taxing and are just way too large.
So you're saying the people are a form of checks and balances. And how does that relate? How does the loyal opposition concepts that you've been discussing relate to the other limited government and any other types of checks and balances? Are there any checks and balances in the Constitution that would preserve or promote loyal opposition? I'll rephrase my question.
Well, one such thing would be in the Senate and the House may determine the rules of their own proceedings. And so in the Senate rules, there's the filibuster. And the filibuster was designed to ensure deliberation in that House of Congress. And that serves as a chance for the opposition to make sure every point is debated and that each side has the time necessary to get in what they want.
I think you can look directly at the Bill of Rights, and they're protecting free speech, freedom of assembly, and freedom to petition. And these things are protecting people's, enabling them, giving the capacity in order to oppose the government and spark change, which Martin Luther King in the March in Birmingham utilized these free speech elements in order to push civil rights legislation.
On that same token, I think that the idea of loyal opposition and limited government go hand in hand. If you look at women petitioning for their right to vote, they believe that the government wasn't justified in denying them the right to vote because the 14th Amendment, they believed, just as it gave blacks the right to vote, should give women the right to vote. And so you look at the loyal opposition of like the Seneca Falls and Elizabeth Cady Stanton and people like that who saw that their rights weren't being recognized, and through the means of loyal opposition, they petitioned and they used their First Amendment rights to ultimately get the amendment passed in 1920 to guarantee them the right to vote.
Okay. You termed, I believe, that loyal opposition was essential to our democratic form of government. So does that mean there may be times when people should be opposing, and if they're not, they're undermining our government? They become disloyal? And I'm sorry if that's confusing, but I'm really asking kind of a double negative question. But if loyal opposition is essential, to me that means we have to have it. So aren't there some times then when you would say, okay, this is one of those times where someone should be stepping up and opposing, and if they don't, does that mean they're not being loyal? Or
Well, I would say that all good governments have loyal opposition, and it's necessary. So when you look at, a country such as Venezuela or Cuba, when the people do give, Hugo Chavez the right to be elected as many times as he want, but then he started controlling the media, not letting opponents broadcast against him, and Venezuela is turning into a worse government, and the country is slowly declining. And so good governments will always have that opposition necessary to survive and to progress.
when you bring up the topic of media, can you comment about the role of the media in loyal opposition?
Well, one pivotal example that you can look at is during the Civil Rights Bill. We can come back to that, and media played a huge role in that. Illustrating the violence of Bull Connor in the streets of Alabama really just stigmatized the support for the Civil Rights Bill.
Even on that same token, the media plays a huge role, and a lot of time the greater public has no idea, because if you look at the different, whatever news channel you choose to flip on, whether it be Fox or MSNBC, well, a lot of the public thinks that they're just watching the news, when in fact they're getting opposition views worked into their news. And so I think that the media plays a huge role in informing the public, because the public is getting biased views from the media.